Hello again, everyone. This is still Diana Kowarski, and welcome to the Soft Skills Salon podcast. This is the podcast where you learn how soft skills make a difference to your work, your teams, and your organization. Here we listen to diverse and international voices, both novice and expert, discussing their real-life perspectives, strategies, and insights in and around the soft skills area. Each episode is a conversation based on our Soft Skills Impact Questionnaire, and it is consisting of 15 questions which our guests have a chance to pre-select from and see which of those questions are of particular interest to them. Our guest today is both colleague and friend, and it is a pleasure for me to introduce all of you to Garima Gupta, who is the founder and CEO of Artha Learning, which is an award-winning e-learning design firm providing custom and off-the-shelf learning solutions. Garima founded Artha to bring world-class e-learning to workforce development and continuing education, and has worked with marquee clients across Canada, US, South America, and Europe. Artha was recently announced as the top small business in Canada, yet another feather in their long list of achievements. Garima leads her high-octane creative team with a blend of hard and soft skills. Herself a software engineer, a learning designer, and a certified training and development professional. She also teaches instructional design and sits on the board of the Institute of Performance and Learning's local chapter. Her passion for her work is second only to her love for her 4-person family and her 15-person team. She joins us today from her home in Kitchener. Hello, Garima.
Hello. I'm so happy to be here. Hi.
I'm delighted that we carved out this time and that we have a chance to connect. I know that there's a lot that you're going to bring to this conversation, because at this podcast, we say that conversation is the currency of communication. And we're going to start our conversations off in response to one of those questions that you selected. On our list, it's item number 7, and it reads, what does success leading others look like to you? Garima, what comes to mind?
So first of all, Diana, as I was saying, happy to be on the podcast, and you and I have worked together as well. This question immediately struck a chord with me as the CEO of my company, leading the firm, leading other people. This is something that I actually spent good time thinking about. Right? I spend good time investigating how am I doing as a leader? What else can I do? What is needed in conversation, in communications, in making this successful? And I think it's a big piece in how people feel around you. What comes to mind? I think immediately, obvious things I might say. As a leader, you want to provide clarity. You want to provide direction to when there is some sort of ambiguity. And that requires courage. That requires taking decisions that might go either way, right? And then owning them. It requires authenticity, because you need people to trust you. You need people to feel like, they can bring their whole selves to yourself. So definitely that. Empathy, I think, is huge. What I have found, and every leader has a different style, but what I have found with my team and with my clients, with my firm and the way we are growing, is that you really need to own your own human self, and you need to acknowledge other people's, because we are. The sphere of work is a very small piece of us as a whole person. So I think, for me, that is super duper important.
There's a lot there. When I asked you what you were thinking, you certainly have given me a lot to begin with. So I take notes, as everyone knows who listens to this podcast. So let me say a couple of responses to you in terms of the notes of what I believe I heard you say. So first off, I'm delighted to hear that you think about leading others and that you are thoughtful in the process about the choices that you make, because you'd be amazed at how many people are either understanding or perhaps underappreciating the importance of investing thinking and perhaps even the meta level of thinking about the thinking that they're doing. So I'm a big proponent for recognizing that there's a mental piece of work here, that leading others just isn't what happens spontaneously. We don't roll out of bed first thing in the morning and have this, array of choices to choose from. So that's the first piece I wanted to echo, is that the thinking about leading can, I think, if I may, only lead to better leading. Like, how can it not, right?
Totally. And it has to be intentional, right? Because it is a choice not to make a choice as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And you can choose to be one kind of leader versus another.
Absolutely. And then I actually came up in my notes with 5 points that you gave me right off. So if I may, I'm going to ask you if I was correct in what I heard. So the first was the significance of clarity, is specifically in giving direction to others. So can you elaborate on that first one? How do you try to be clear in your directions? What is it that you do in that regard?
So, and I would answer that in context to the kind of work we do, right? So we are an e-learning design development firm. We work on projects with our clients, every project being a little different, every process being a little different, because it's custom to who the client is, who their learners are, what the topic is. So every time there might be something it's not cookie cutter.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a need for clarity on, what if I want to do this, which is a little bit out of scope, right? What does this mean? How do I go about it? And especially when you have a mixed team, there are some people who are very experienced. There are some people who are getting started. There are some people who are halfway there. And I think leadership just is such a beautiful path to coaching and mentoring in a way, where you're providing that clarity and direction, saying, yes, this is okay, this is not okay. You're giving them that room to make errors and grow. And then when they're confused, you can tell them, yeah, this is, that piece is such an important part of growth. And yet clarity sometimes is also stepping back. So I'll tell you a story. One of my senior instructional designers, I was reviewing a storyboard and I left comments. But she was new with us, and I had to tell her that don't take my comments too seriously, because now you are leading this project, you know much more than I do about the client and about the content. So I am, of course, bringing my experience in, but just because I'm your boss doesn't mean my comment has more weight than yours. So clarity there in what your role is, what their role is, how do they work with you is super important.
Again, a lot in your answer and a revealing story. So I'm hearing that the significance of feedback and conversations in terms of providing direction, and that there's a clarity that can come even from clarification of roles and divisions of labor. And I'm particularly struck by the acknowledgement in what you just said about how it is that as the employer or the boss, you might not have the same level of intimacy or rapport with a particular client, or even with a aspect of the work you're designing that might be reflected in a storyboard, that staff member or that e-learning or instructional designer who's more client facing may have. So there's a real importance there in leading others, recognizing that our titles don't always determine the quality of our feedback. Right?
Totally. In fact, the better leader you are, you're probably leading people who are way more talented than you, right? Big picture, but I would hope. And in fact, even in personal lives, right? We are parents, our kids may know more than us, but we can pull rank. Doesn't mean we should be pulling rank. Doesn't know more than them always.
Yeah. There's alternative knowledge. And sometimes we, in both our personal and our professional lives, can assume that longevity or that application or experience or whatever we want to call our tenure can somehow qualify that perspective when that isn't always the best approach. There were 4 other points that I actually gathered from your initial comments that I want to make sure that I echo to see if there's any further resonance for you. The second was your mentioning of the value of courage in leading others, in particular around making decisions. Your third was around the significance of authenticity to build trust. And there it is that you mentioned the idea of bringing your whole self to the work that you do and hopefully inviting others to bring them their whole selves as well. The fourth point that I heard was about empathy, which really, in my thinking, is an extension of that whole person or whole self approach, because there's a great deal more opportunity for empathy to be established when we have more information about each other. And then the last one, you doubled down on this idea in my notes about your whole human self and acknowledging others with their own whole human self. That last point in particular, because I am aware that you have a geographically dispersed team. How do you as a leader have people bring or own acknowledging their whole human self to their work?
So, Diana, when I founded the firm and when we started hiring other people, I was and still am full of gratitude about the fact that somebody would tie their career with us. Somebody would walk in the same caravan as us, right? And that is both a big responsibility and an honor. Again, there are whole lives behind this. Is very important to me as a person. And I think the best way I can explain that is, again, via a story very recently, and it's not necessarily a happy story, a very, very special person in our team lost her adult son. And do you know, you get 3 days of leave, bereavement leave, 3 days. What is 3 days when your whole life has been upended? And, we all came together for her, the whole team, and there was absolutely no discussion about how long do you need to take time off. It is what it is. And we all substituted for her. We all divided the work among us. The clients understood. And it became something which could have been tackled very surgically, very, legally, but it is a shared experience, right? And good or bad, every such experience brings you together. And I think that is that is how you take your whole self in. And although geographically distributed, we are all more or less, most of us in Canada. So I was in Montreal last week meeting, because 3 of us are in Montreal. So we sort of came together. It was just a whole day of in-person team meeting, because nothing connects you like an in-person, just seeing, oh, so you are this tall. I did not know that on the Zoom.
It's true. I find the theme, whether it's, whole person or human self or inclusivity of lifestyle, or however we refer to bringing and sharing, if I may, ourselves with our team and or our employer, that this part of leading others as a subset of soft skills has had a bit of a renaissance in this COVID era. And, I can tell you for myself, working as a trainer or as an external vendor, for example, coming into an organization historically, certainly most of my time before COVID, there was a very clear limit to the amount of interest, both the client and my potential learners or end users, if you will, that there was a limit to their interest in who I was or what I was, experiencing in my little life. And there was an interest in there being a service that I delivered, almost in a sanitized package as a vehicle that, I happened to be the vehicle by which the service was being provided. And I've seen a real shift in people suddenly asking me if I'm partnered, or if, what might be my ethnicity, or what might be,
Yeah.
how I spend my time elsewise, or if I've chosen to engage in a certain activity, or if I'm in this community. And only since COVID have I been asked those sorts of questions. Again, because I do work with so many people on short-term bases, it's not a really fair sample in terms of employer or employee relationships. But from my perspective, no one wanted to know my favorite color pre-COVID. And suddenly people are interested in what's my favorite color, and what does it do on weekends and so
Yeah.
on. And I
I
think
think
that's,
a part of that is that Zoom has brought us into each other's houses,
yes,
right? And therefore you are more of a real person than other. But I think minus COVID also there has been a general shift towards more, I don't want to say woke, but I can't find the right word. More real, authentic leadership.
yes,
Bernie Brown's work on vulnerability being so popular is an example. Now, I don't necessarily imagine I would want to bring all my luggage.
yes, I agree.
No, not really. You're still carrying a persona, and I think each one of us is. But I think that persona is a little more solid, a little more tangible than it all previously was.
Absolutely. And to circle all that back to in success of leading others, there's a interest there in others being real, and the reciprocation and bringing more of our own real self to leading others. So there's a bit of evolution, if not perhaps a lot of evolution to that. It does lead us to this next question that I have to say is by far the most popular question on this version of this questionnaire. And I also, in full disclosure, like to admit that this was in the 11th hour, a question that I put into this questionnaire because I just thought the questionnaire was too short. So I came up with this one. And I really agonized over putting it in, and it's been remarkably popular. And it's one that I'm interested to hear your thoughts on. And it is item number 13, which reads, how do you define confidence?
I am not surprised that it's your most popular question.
Really?
No, because you know what? I'll tell you, it is the most attractive quality in a person, for me at least, is confidence. And I think there is a clear, thick line, at least for me, between confidence in the middle, timidness on the other side, and arrogance on the other side. I think there is a very clear difference. It's not a thin line. When you're confident, you own your space, you're comfortable, you're happy almost in your own presence, but also you're giving others the same permission, right? You are you're in a receptive situation, but not necessarily in a survive situation. So I think, and for me, confidence. And I was thinking about this, Diana, before we went online.
Yeah.
And I was thinking there are actually two very clear demarcations there. There is a deep confidence that comes when you're rooted in your values and your self-worth and belonging. And, you need to feign it. But then there is an external perception of confidence, right? And is all about, what's your get-up, how you speak, how prepared you are in a situation. And that's something that you can easily work on. So I can tell you, when I'm well put together, I exude confidence. And I'm like, such a simple thing to manage, that there's no reason one would not do that and be better, available to the world. But then there is a deeper, more internal version of that, which is you and your life and how you perceive your own self-worth. But in either way, there is such a room in confidence for growth, which I think arrogance does not have, and even timidness does not have, right? You're not a know-it-all, but you can, in a way, you can be like, I can learn it all sort of person.
Lots to work with there, Garima. Thank you for that. And the first point I have is perhaps around your final point and the idea of growth being a part of confidence. And the idea of a growth mindset is one that's been in the ether for a long time around soft skills and certainly around confidence and communicating in general. And one of the little phrases that I've had brought into my own thinking and working with some international partners in the last couple of months is the turn of phrase, not yet. So are you doing this? Not yet.
Yeah.
Are you this? Not yet. Have you been there? Not yet. And this idea of not yet suggesting, and it is a negative.
I love it.
But it does mean progress, at least some sort of process that the progress could follow, like could be quite stalled and non-pleasurable. The idea that there's something on the horizon, or that there even is a horizon. And I do agree with you that there's something about confidence, perhaps for both our own thinking, but also, as you said, how we make ourselves available to the world, that there's a potential, and that's what growth is really about, right? Or possibility, or that there's something there that isn't yet revealed. I'd say in comparison, you use the word arrogance. I think arrogance is often a dead end, right? And I can't tell you that I haven't been arrogant or that I won't be arrogant again. I'm very aware of my own humanity. However, I do think it is always, and I don't say that lightly, that it is a dead end because it is fatalistic, right? When we assert ourselves to the point where we are arrogant, we're closed to growth. Do you agree?
Totally. And very true on the other side as well, because in my own humanity, I used to lack confidence, especially in my early stages of career and life. And to some degree, I would take that as a virtue of humility, a virtue, and coming from my heritage. So if you guys haven't figured out from my accent yet, I'm an Indian origin person. And people, a woman of color in the Western world, in the training industry, where pronunciation and enunciation and confidence and putting your ideas out there is a big deal.
Yes.
I had a little bit of initial sort of struggle with confidence. And I find that more often than not, it's an excuse. And it might hurt to face that, but it really is an excuse because you don't want to grow. You're lazy in some senses because growth takes real work, right?
Yes.
If you find yourself in either sides of the spectrum, or that you're there, it is just, I feel like you really sort of need to work to come to the place where you can be a welcoming, confident person, welcoming both to ideas and to other people.
I understand. And there's a lot of culturally specific information that everyone has, no matter what their cultural background or how they may, align themselves, whether by circumstance, by birth, or by choice, and all the combinations that we have. And in addition to that, I'd even throw in, some of the ideas that we have that are gender specific as well. So, I've worked with a lot of different people who, in response to wanting and truly wanting to increase their sense of confidence, as well as how they're perceived as confident, that their barrier has been some of the cultural learning, or perhaps some of their, intellectual inheritance from either their family or their community or their belief system, or all of the above, that has said, well, it's better if you do that. And it's really difficult to acknowledge that some of that learning is not necessarily who one has to be at all times. I'm not suggesting any of it is wrong, but that there's an opportunity. And I think this goes back to the growth idea, that if you are seeking out more confidence in how you feel and seeking out more confidence in how you're perceived, that some of that cultural or faith-based or ethnicity-based stuff that we have, and we all have variations of that, it's addressing that and trying to understand your own relationship with that information without trying to necessarily negate it. So I wouldn't say any of it is wrong, and I use big air quotes even on an audio podcast. However, it's not necessarily who one is at all times. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. And that is such a big bag of ideas that you've put out there in this conversation, right? And such a complex piece there that we all grew up with, because we are all a product of our nurturing and our environment, and then who we are ourselves. But I think as we grow, and as the more and more intentionally you grow, right, you're able to see that and be more selective about how you want to do that, right? What part of your culture, your heritage, your experience, your history continues to resonate with you? What grows you, what helps you, and what does not? And then be selective around that, because ultimately we are us, we are an individual, we are works in progress. And
yes,
working on us is us.
I think you're right. And there is a key word here that many of us on the planet, and I'm making a broad sweeping generalization here. There's a word here that both of us keep using, and that is work, right? It is work to be thoughtful in how it is that you are thinking and deliberately choosing to frame your approach to leading others. That's a tie back to our very first question. And it is work to do that analysis of one's heritage or one's experiences, even, or some of the lessons that perhaps we have inherited from role models, and separating out what might be nurturing versus what might be detrimental now.
Yeah.
Which is a very different lens than then, right?
Yeah, and it's part of sort of games people play is, you put yourself in a role, and the role might be knowingly or unknowingly of a victim of your surroundings, and that impacts your confidence. But that is something that can, to some extent, is in your hands, right? And I just find that is such an empowering thought. And it is probably not it is most often not an easy road. It is difficult, it is painful, it is irritating, it is full of potholes, it's full of, at least for me, it's like, oh my God, why did I say that? And how did I do this? I could have done this better, and I could have, but all that is important piece, that internal feedback that goes on is super duper important.
Absolutely. And that internal source of feedback, tapping into that can be part of the work, and that level of self-awareness and recognizing that there's a source there for self-knowledge and self-development, and for how you can tend to one's own choices and perhaps even, broaden the spectrum. There's a turn of phrase that I was just speaking to my son about yesterday, and it keeps coming up in my world, so I'm going to repeat it now, which is, they are called growing pains. They are not called growing tickles. Right? It's not a growing tickle. It's a growing pain. And to my life and how I'm still trying to figure out my own maturation, there's some pain there, and it isn't always overwhelming and paralyzing. It can be, dull and quite mild, but some of the learning there of growing does require some of that self-awareness, where, as you just suggested, you're double thinking, oh, why did I say that?
Exactly, and I'm probably going to do that after we stop recording here. It's like, yeah, why did I say that? But let me say this too, kind of the growing pain, and I love that, but it doesn't necessarily have to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a pain, but you could enjoy it. You could see it from a witness standpoint almost, right?
Yeah.
Sitting on a balcony and seeing that kind of play out and say, look at that Garima. Look at how she messed up on Diana's podcast and see how she recovered. Good job there, right? And that's how you sort of, kind of build a distance between you as the witness and you as the player.
Yes.
You just keep showing up, and that's all. You just keep showing up. It's life. How seriously can we take it?
I think keep showing up is one of the simplest and most complex quotes that I don't know whose it is originally. I'm going to say it's yours, Garima, from now on. But keep showing up is part of not necessarily always being in accord, right? There can be discord in keep showing up, or there can be misunderstanding, or there can be disconnect or some difficulties. However, there's a great deal connected in that simple 3-word phrase, keep showing up, that relates back to developing trust, that relates back to bringing your whole self to the job, that relates back to owning the decisions, as you had suggested initially, or the idea of authenticity. And it doesn't mean that every project will necessarily be stellar, but it does mean that there's again a certain implication around the work, or maybe effort. So is that perhaps the theme here? So are we to be effortful about self and effortful towards others? Is that?
I love how you sort of brought it all together. And speaking of effort, though, there is a paradox there, because the more effortless something looks, the more effort has gone into it, right? You see me swimming and you see like a master swimmer swimming, and I'd be putting in so much effort in every stroke of mine, right? When you start learning cycling, so it looks so painful because effort has gone in yet, no practice has gone in yet. So effort also makes things easier. I think that's the only sort of, I guess, solace we have in all of this work and effort, is that it does get easier as you keep doing it.
Absolutely. And I love that you've pointed out the paradox. It's the optics, right? The optics of, he, she, they are so confident. Meanwhile, if we have a conversation with that person, they feel like their insides have turned to mush, and they're remarkably uncomfortable, and they're just dedicating themselves to surviving until they can run away somewhere. However, they look so confident. Wow. And how does that happen? Well, sometimes it's because that person has spent a lot of time trying to harness and trying to manage all that inner stuff that doesn't necessarily go away, right?
No, but it gets more, you get more familiar with it, right? And now that you're going on the stage, your stomach is going to feel like mush, but you know how to manage it.
Yep.
And part of it is exactly that, right? Fake it till you make it. And we all get sort of, get pulled into this optics, whether it's on social media, whether it's in real life, where we only see a piece, the outer piece of how well somebody's performing without knowing how hard they have worked at it. But that work, I think, that effort is the key, because there is no substitute to being actually really valuable.
I agree with you. And there's no substitute for the great effort that you've put into this podcast. And I thank you so much for your insights and your stories. And I only hope that we can figure out a way to spend more time together, Garima. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. So thank you very much for your time.
So wonderful. High currency in your words. Wonderful conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much for listening to another dynamic and informative episode of the Soft Skills Salon with your host, Diana Kowarski. Please consider subscribing to our show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we also encourage you to visit our website and social media links, which you can find in the show's notes. We look forward to bringing you another episode. And remember, conversation is the currency of communication. Bye for now.